On a secluded mountain trail, a group of aggressive bikers known for bullying hikers sets their sights on a lone man resting by the path. What they don't know is this quiet figure is Andre Cade, a decorated Special Forces veteran on leave. When the bikers corner him, intending to intimidate, they unleash a storm they're woefully unprepared for. What begins as a menacing encounter escalates into a stunning display of skill and humanity that will change lives and perspectives forever. Andre Cade set out early in the morning, the crisp air of the mountain trail rejuvenating his weary soul. A lone traveler on a path less trodden, he welcomed the solitude. His military life had been an endless cycle of chaos, discipline, and sacrifice. The mountain offered peace, a stark contrast to the cacophony of battlefields. Andre had no intention of confronting anyone or anything today. The rhythmic crunch of his boots against the dirt trail was like a mantra, keeping his thoughts steady. Far ahead, hidden around a bend, a group of bikers loitered near a trailhead. Brett Carson, the gang's self-appointed leader, leaned casually against his Harley, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The mountain trail was their playground, their turf, and they enjoyed asserting dominance over anyone they encountered. For them, intimidation was a game, a way to kill time and remind themselves they were kings of this little patch of wilderness. And today, they spotted Andre, a lone figure with a backpack. "Look at this guy," Brett sneered, nudging his closest crony Vince. "All alone, minding his business. How boring." The bikers laughed, their voices cutting through the tranquil mountain air. Andre, still oblivious to their presence, continued his ascent. But the gang had already decided he was their next source of entertainment. The hum of their engines grew louder as Brett gestured for his crew to mount up. "Let's have some fun," Brett said, flicking his cigarette to the ground. One by one, the others followed, revving their engines. The sound shattered the serene silence, a prelude to the chaos they intended to unleash. As Andre reached a clearing, the thunderous roar of the motorcycles echoed behind him. He turned, seeing the gang approach like a pack of wolves on the hunt. He instinctively shifted his stance, his military training flickering to life like an old habit. But outwardly, he remained calm, his expression unreadable. The bikers formed a semicircle around him, their engines still growling. Dust kicked up from the trail as they braked hard. Brett, at the center, dismounted and swaggered toward Andre, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Well, well," Brett said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do we have here? A soldier boy out for a stroll?" Andre didn't respond immediately. He surveyed the group. 6 men, all clad in leather, their faces masked with smug grins. Their body language screamed arrogance, but their eyes revealed something more telling. Insecurity masquerading as bravado. "I'm just passing through," Andre finally said, his voice steady and measured. Brett chuckled, turning to his crew. "Hear that, boys? He's just passing through. Didn't realize this trail belonged to us." The others laughed, feeding off Brett's energy. Andre sighed internally. He'd seen this type before, bullies who thrived on power dynamics, pushing others to inflate their fragile egos. "I don't want trouble," Andre said, his tone firm but calm. "Let me pass, and we can all go our separate ways." But Brett wasn't interested in peace. "What if I don't feel like letting you pass?" he taunted, stepping closer. The smell of cigarettes and cheap beer wafted from him. "You gonna make me move?" Andre's jaw tightened. His instincts screamed at him to de-escalate, but he also knew men like Brett rarely backed down without a lesson. Still, he tried one last time. "Walk away," Andre said, his voice dropping an octave. "This doesn't have to go any further." Brett's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, it's going further, soldier boy." He gestured to his crew, and 2 of them dismounted, cracking their knuckles as they approached. Andre took a step back, dropping his pack to the ground. He knew what was coming. The bikers thought they had the upper hand, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Years of training in hand-to-hand combat, survival tactics, and situational awareness had prepared Andre for moments like this, but he wasn't eager to unleash it unless absolutely necessary. The first biker, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, lunged at Andre. In a blur, Andre sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with precision. A sharp cry of pain echoed as the biker crumpled to his knees. The second man, heavier and slower, swung a meaty fist. Andre ducked effortlessly, landing a swift jab to the man's solar plexus. He staggered, gasping for air, his eyes wide with shock. The remaining bikers froze, their confidence shaken. Brett's face contorted with rage. "Get him!" he barked, but none of his men moved. Andre straightened, his eyes locking on Brett. "Enough," he said. "No one else has to get hurt. Walk away." But Brett's pride wouldn't let him back down. He charged at Andre, fists swinging wildly. Andre sidestepped again, using Brett's momentum against him. With a fluid motion, he tripped Brett, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The gang leader lay there, stunned, as Andre calmly picked up his pack. "Next time, pick your battles more wisely," Andre said, his voice carrying an edge of finality. The bikers watched in silence as Andre walked away, their egos bruised and their leader humiliated. None of them dared follow. For Andre, it was just another day. But for the bikers, it was a moment they'd never forget. A lesson in humility delivered by the quiet strength of a man who fought only when he had to. Andre Cade descended further along the mountain trail, leaving the confrontation behind him, but his mind stayed sharp. Experience had taught him that trouble often came in waves, and this gang didn't strike him as the type to let a bruised ego go unchecked. He had seen the look in Brett's eyes, pride wounded, anger smoldering. Andre knew all too well it wouldn't take much to fan those flames. As the sun climbed higher, Andre came across a shaded clearing with a bubbling stream cutting through it. He crouched down, filling his canteen with cool water, the rhythmic sound of the stream briefly soothing. A small squirrel darted across the rocks, undeterred by his presence, but the peace shattered when a distant sound reached his ears, the faint growl of motorcycle engines climbing the trail. Andre stood slowly, screwing the cap back onto his canteen before strapping it to his pack. His movements were deliberate, each one preserving energy while preparing for what might come next. The engines grew louder, and Andre could tell the bikers were approaching as a group. This wasn't a coincidence, it was retaliation. He stepped back onto the trail, his boots crunching against gravel as he moved with purpose. The forest around him was alive with birdsong, a strange contrast to the imminent tension. After a few minutes, he found a narrow section of the path bordered by a steep rock face on one side and a sheer drop on the other. It was a natural bottleneck, a place where their numbers wouldn't matter. Andre leaned against the rock face, his breathing steady, and waited. The engines roared louder until the gang appeared, Brett leading the way. His face was tight with fury, and his men followed in tight formation. They stopped abruptly when they saw Andre, standing calmly with his arms crossed. "Well, well," Brett sneered, dismounting his bike. "Didn't think we'd find you so soon, soldier boy." Andre didn't respond, letting silence hang in the air. It forced the bikers to fill the void with bravado. "You embarrassed us back there," Brett growled. "Now we're going to teach you why that was a mistake." The bikers spread out, forming a loose semicircle. Andre noted their movements, their crude weapons, chains, knives, and even a pipe. This wasn't posturing anymore. They were here to draw blood. "I warned you," Andre said. "You should have walked away." Brett laughed harshly. "Big words for a guy outnumbered 6-1. Andre's expression didn't change. "Numbers don't mean much if you don't know how to use them." Brett's face darkened and he stepped forward. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh? Let's see how—" Andre moved first, closing the distance in a blur. He grabbed Brett's arm, twisting it behind his back. Brett cried out as Andre used him as a shield. "Drop it," Andre barked at one biker who raised a knife. His commanding tone left no room for argument. The man hesitated before letting the knife fall. The others lunged, but the narrow trail worked to Andre's advantage. Each attack came from a predictable direction. He struck with precision, crippling without causing permanent harm. A punch to the gut, a kick to the knee. One by one, they fell. Brett, still pinned, cursed and struggled. "You think this is over. You don't know who you're messing with." Andre shoved him forward. "It's over when you make it over. Walk away." Brett scrambled to his feet, his face a mix of rage and humiliation. He glanced at his groaning crew. For a moment it seemed he might continue, but then he spat on the ground. "Let's go," he growled. "This ain't worth it." The bikers limped to their bikes, casting wary glances at Andre. Brett was the last to leave. "We'll see you again, soldier boy," he muttered before roaring down the trail. Andre stood motionless for a while, watching the empty path before him. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to wane, leaving him with a familiar calm that always came after a storm. He adjusted his pack, the straps tightening over his shoulders, and began walking again. The wind rustled the leaves above him, a reminder that the world kept moving forward. As he walked, Andre reflected on the events of the morning. The mountain trail, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield. Yet, even in conflict, it had revealed truths about himself, about the fragile bravado of men like Brett, and about the nature of strength. Strength wasn't about dominance, it was about control, discipline, and knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Andre passed another hiker on the trail, a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a friendly smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the man said. Andre nodded. "It is." The man continued on his way, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded just a mile up the trail. Andre envied him in a way, but he also knew that the peace the man enjoyed was protected by people like him, those who bore the weight of conflict so others could walk freely. Every step Andre took was deliberate, but his thoughts remained alert. The mountains could offer peace, but they could just as easily test one's strength. Andre had already faced both today, and he wasn't sure which was the harder challenge. What he did know was that the trail ahead was long, and there was still much to learn from the path he had chosen to walk alone. The air grew thinner as Andre climbed higher into the mountains, his pace steady and deliberate. The encounter with Brett and his gang lingered in his mind, not as a source of worry, but as a reminder. Trouble had a way of circling back, especially when pride and humiliation were involved. By mid-afternoon, Andre reached a plateau with a panoramic view of the wilderness. He dropped his pack near a boulder and sat down to rest. The wind carried the faint scent of pine, and birds called from the treetops. For a moment, it was easy to forget the tension of the morning. Andre closed his eyes, letting the stillness wash over him. But peace was fleeting. A low, irregular rumble reached his ears, cutting through the forest's natural rhythm. Andre opened his eyes and scanned the horizon. The sound grew louder, more distinct. He stood, his body tensing as the noise became unmistakable. Engines. These weren't the roaring bikes of Brett's gang. They were deeper, heavier, ATVs. Andre spotted movement below the plateau. 4 ATVs emerged from the tree line, each carrying 2 riders. Their dark clothing and visible weapons marked them as something else entirely. They moved with purpose, their path cutting directly toward the plateau. Andre didn't wait. He grabbed his pack and moved quickly, scanning the area for cover. The plateau offered little concealment, but a narrow trail leading upward caught his eye. Without hesitation, he started climbing, his military training kicking in. Higher ground was always an advantage. The trail wound sharply, and the rock face became jagged as he ascended. The sound of the ATVs faded briefly, but Andre knew they wouldn't be far behind. He reached a narrow ledge and paused, his chest rising and falling steadily. From here, he could see the riders below as they dismounted and spread out. Andre's sharp eyes caught the glint of metal. Rifles. This wasn't a coincidence. These men were hunting him. He crouched low, his mind working quickly. Retreating wasn't an option. The ledge was too exposed. He spotted a path a few feet below that led to a dense thicket of trees. It wasn't much, but it would give him cover. Andre descended carefully, his boots gripping the uneven rock. He reached the path and slipped into the trees, his movements quiet and deliberate. The forest swallowed him, the thick canopy filtering the sunlight into dappled patches. He moved deeper, listening for any sign of pursuit. Voices, low, guttural, and filled with intent. The men were close, their footsteps crunching against the forest floor. Andre positioned himself behind a large tree. He could see them now. 6 men, each armed and scanning the area. Andre scanned the area and spotted a cluster of loose rocks perched on a slope. It wasn't much, but it could create a distraction, maybe even buy him time. He moved silently, keeping low as he reached the base of the slope. With precise movements, he dislodged the rocks, sending them tumbling down. The sound echoed through the forest, drawing the men's attention. They turned sharply, their weapons raised, and began moving toward the noise. Andre used the distraction to slip further into the forest. His movements were swift and controlled, each step calculated to avoid making noise. He reached a dense patch of undergrowth and crouched low. He could hear the men nearby, their voices sharp as they barked orders to one another. "This guy's good," one of them muttered. "He's leading us in circles." Andre waited, his body still as the men moved closer. When they were within range, Andre sprang into action. He launched himself at the nearest man, his movements quick and precise. A sharp blow to the man's neck sent him crumpling before he could react. Andre grabbed the rifle from his hands and rolled into the undergrowth, disappearing before the others could pinpoint his location. "Over there!" one of them shouted. Andre didn't wait. He moved deeper into the forest, using the terrain to his advantage. The dense undergrowth slowed the men down, their larger frames struggling to maneuver. Andre, lean and agile, slipped through with ease. He reached another slope and climbed quickly, gaining higher ground. The chase continued, but the men were losing steam. Andre could hear their frustration in their shouts, their movements less coordinated. He reached a rocky outcrop and crouched low, his eyes scanning the forest below. The men were scattered now, their formation broken. Andre knew this was his moment. He moved quickly, descending the slope and circling back toward the plateau. The men were too focused on searching ahead to notice him slipping behind them. When he reached the forest's edge, he broke into a sprint, his legs carrying him swiftly across the open ground. The ATVs were still there, parked near the tree line. Andre didn't hesitate. He mounted one and started the engine, the machine roaring to life. The noise drew the men's attention, but it was too late. Andre gunned the throttle and sped away, the forest blurring past him. As the wind whipped against his face, Andre felt a surge of adrenaline. He didn't know who those men were or why they were after him, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. Trouble, as always, had a way of finding him. But Andre Cade was a man who didn't run from trouble. He faced it head-on. The ATV roared as Andre sped through the mountain trail, the dense forest rushing past him in a blur. His mind was focused on the path ahead, but his ears were attuned to the sounds behind him. Shouts, engines, and the crack of gunfire. The men were still chasing him, their persistence a reminder that they weren't amateurs. Andre maneuvered the vehicle with precision, navigating sharp turns and uneven terrain. The trail became narrower, the towering pines pressing closer. He spotted a ravine ahead, a narrow wooden bridge spanning its width. The bridge looked old, its planks weathered, but it was his only option. He gunned the throttle, the ATV leaping forward as it hit the bridge. The wooden planks groaned under the weight, but the vehicle made it across. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The men had mounted their own ATVs and were closing in. Andre glanced back briefly, his sharp eyes catching the glint of rifles raised. Another gunshot rang out, the bullet whizzing past him and striking a tree just ahead. He ducked instinctively, his grip tightening on the handlebars. The trail forked into 2 paths, Without hesitation, Andre veered left, the narrower of the options. The path was overgrown with underbrush and littered with fallen branches, but it offered better cover. He weaved through the obstacles, the ATV's engine growling as it powered through rugged terrain. The forest grew denser, the canopy above blocking out much of the sunlight. Shadows danced across the ground, making it harder to see. Andre's mind raced, calculating his next move. He needed to gain the upper hand. The chase couldn't last forever, and he wasn't about to let them corner him. Up ahead, he spotted a clearing. He slowed the ATV as he approached, his eyes scanning the area for anything he could use. The clearing was surrounded by large boulders and fallen trees, remnants of an old rock slide. Andre quickly formulated a plan. He parked the ATV behind a thick cluster of bushes and began gathering what he needed. Minutes later, the sound of engines signaled the arrival of his pursuers. Andre crouched low behind a boulder, his preparations complete. The men entered the clearing cautiously, their weapons ready. They dismounted their ATVs and spread out, scanning the area. "He's here," one of them muttered. "Fan out. Find him." Andre waited, his breathing steady, until they were within range. Then, with practiced precision, he triggered the trap he had set. A large branch, weighted with rocks, swung down, striking one of the men and knocking him to the ground. Chaos erupted as the others reacted, shouting orders and aiming their rifles wildly. Andre moved quickly, circling the clearing to gain a better position. He knew he couldn't take them all head-on, but he didn't need to. His goal was to divide and conquer, to use the terrain and their own confusion against them. He spotted one of the men breaking off from the group, moving toward the far side of the clearing. Andre moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the forest floor. He closed the distance quickly, grabbing the man from behind and disabling him with a swift, precise strike. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The remaining men were growing agitated, their shouts echoing through the clearing. "He's picking us off," one of them yelled. "Stay together." Andre smirked to himself. They were nervous, and nervous men made mistakes. He continued his methodical approach, using the rocks and trees for cover as he eliminated another pursuer. The odds were shifting in his favor, but he knew better than to get overconfident. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, barked orders to the others. "Spread out! Flush him out!" Andre recognized the man's voice from earlier. It was the one shouting commands during the chase. This was the man in charge, the one calling the shots. Andre decided it was time to end this. He moved swiftly, his eyes locked on the leader. The man was focused on scanning the trees ahead, unaware of Andre's approach. In one fluid motion, Andre closed the distance and struck, disarming the man and pinning him to the ground. The leader struggled, but Andre's grip was unyielding. "Who sent you?" Andre demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man glared up at him, defiance in his eyes. "You've made some powerful enemies, soldier." Andre tightened his grip. "I don't have time for games. Talk." The man hesitated, then smirked. "You think this ends here? You have no idea what's coming." Before Andre could press further, a shout from one of the remaining men forced him to move. He released the leader and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a shot that struck the ground where he had just been. He retreated into the forest, his mind racing. The leader's words echoed in his head, a chilling reminder that this was just the beginning. Andre moved quickly, using the dense forest to his advantage as he put distance between himself and the clearing. He reached a hidden trail and followed it, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Whoever these men were, they were organized, well-equipped, and determined. But Andre Cade had faced worse, and he wasn't about to back down now. Andre Cade moved swiftly along the hidden trail, the forest muffling the chaos behind him. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch made him pause, scanning for signs of pursuit. The leader's chilling words echoed in his mind. "You have no idea what's coming." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise, one Andre wasn't taking lightly. The trail inclined sharply, leading Andre higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, and the forest thinned slightly, giving way to rocky outcrops. He needed answers. Who were these men? Why were they hunting him with such ruthless precision? And, more importantly, how far were they willing to go? Andre reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. He crouched low, scanning the terrain with the instincts of a soldier. The valley was dense with trees, a narrow river cutting through its center and glinting faintly in the fading light. The river could be an escape route, but it wouldn't be easy to navigate. He weighed his options carefully. A faint hum reached his ears, growing louder with each passing second. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the source. A helicopter. Andre cursed softly under his breath. The stakes had just been raised. Flattening himself against the rocky surface, he used the contours of the ridge for cover. The helicopter circled overhead, its searchlight slicing through the twilight. Andre remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled and shallow. The beam of light passed over him once, twice before moving on. But he knew better than to relax. They'd be back, methodical in their search. Andre's sharp eyes scanned his surroundings and found a narrow crevice in the rock face. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, but it led to a steep path descending toward the valley floor. Without hesitation, he moved, his boots gripping the uneven surface as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The distant hum of the helicopter faded, replaced by the rustling of the forest below. The valley floor was cooler, its dense canopy casting the landscape in shadow. Andre followed the narrow river, its gentle flow calming his racing thoughts. The quiet belied the tension that knotted his muscles. He needed to gain the upper hand, and fast. His chance came sooner than expected. Andre spotted a faint flicker of orange through the trees, a campfire. He crouched low, moving silently toward the light. As he drew closer, he saw two men sitting by the fire, their rifles propped casually against a log. They weren't part of the group chasing him earlier, but their tactical gear made it clear they were reinforcements. Andre's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a small team. They had backup. The men spoke in low voices, their conversation lost to the crackling fire. Andre moved closer, staying downwind to mask his approach. He waited for the perfect moment, then struck with surgical precision. One man went down silently, his head striking the dirt as Andre disabled him. The other barely had time to react before Andre had him pinned to the ground. "Who are you working for?" Andre demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man struggled weakly, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know. We're just following orders." Andre tightened his grip. "Who gave the orders?" The man hesitated, his breath coming in short gasps before spitting out a name. Kessler. The name sent a chill down Andre's spine. Kessler was a ghost, a man who operated in the shadows, pulling strings and orchestrating chaos for profit. His name carried weight, a reminder of how deep this operation went. "What does Kessler want with me?" Andre pressed. The man shook his head desperately. "I don't know. He just said to find you and bring you in. Alive." Before Andre could ask more, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. A sniper. Andre rolled to the side as a bullet struck the ground where they'd been. The man cried out, but Andre silenced him with a sharp glare. "Stay here," Andre ordered before vanishing into the shadows. The sniper's position wasn't hard to pinpoint. The glint of a scope in the moonlight gave him away. Andre moved swiftly, using the trees for cover. He reached the tree where the sniper perched and climbed silently. The sniper never saw him coming. With the sniper neutralized, Andre retrieved the rifle and scanned the area. The forest was alive with movement. More men were closing in. Andre's jaw tightened. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was war. Andre returned to the campfire, but the man he had questioned was gone. The reinforcements were getting smarter, more coordinated. Andre knew his time was running out. He needed to act, and soon. Andre Cade didn't know what Kessler wanted, but he wasn't going to wait to find out. If Kessler wanted a fight, he had just found one. Andre Cade knew the time for running had ended. The revelation of Kessler's involvement meant this was no ordinary manhunt. Kessler wasn't just sending men after him, he was orchestrating a calculated operation. Andre wasn't sure why, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was stopping them, here and now. The forest around him, once alive with shouts and engines, had fallen eerily silent. Andre moved stealthily, his sniper rifle cradled in his hands. He had spent the last hour circling back on his hunters, gaining a tactical advantage. Years of military training had taught him that survival wasn't about endurance alone. It was about taking control of the battlefield. From his elevated position atop a narrow ridge, Andre scanned the valley below. The men Kessler had sent were skilled, but their fatigue was evident. Their earlier precision had given way to desperation, their movements less disciplined. Andre crouched low, his breathing steady. He wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. The first squad appeared on a narrow trail below. There were 5 of them, weapons drawn, moving cautiously in single file. Andre took aim, his finger steady on the trigger. One shot, and the man at the rear dropped instantly. The others scrambled for cover, their shouts of alarm breaking the silence. Andre used their panic to reposition. He moved swiftly and silently through the underbrush, setting up another shot before they had time to regroup. His second target fell, and the remaining men scattered into the trees. Andre smirked to himself. They were disorganized now, and disorganization was a soldier's worst enemy. But he wasn't underestimating them. This was just one of many squads Kessler had deployed. For every man he took out, there were likely 2 more waiting in reserve. He needed a bigger play. The rugged terrain around him offered an opportunity. A series of old rock slides had left unstable piles of boulders scattered along the ridges. If he could trigger an avalanche, he could block one of the main paths into the valley, cutting off reinforcements. It was a risk. He would have to expose himself briefly, but Andre thrived on risk. He climbed to the top of a steep slope, his boots gripping the loose rock. Reaching the edge, he spotted a precarious boulder held in place by a tangle of roots. With precise movements, Andre dislodged it, sending it tumbling downward. The ground trembled as the boulder struck others, creating a chain reaction. Rocks and debris thundered down the slope, sealing the trail below. When the dust settled, the path was impassable. Andre didn't stop to admire his work. He moved quickly to a new vantage point, scanning the forest with his rifle's scope. On a parallel trail, another squad was advancing. At their center was a tall man, his calm demeanor and commanding gestures marking him as the leader. Andre lined up the shot. A single breath later, the man collapsed. The squad hesitated, their cohesion unraveling. Andre took out another target before fading back into the trees. The night dragged on, but Andre's resolve never wavered. He set traps using loose rocks and fallen branches, leading his pursuers into ambushes. His every move was deliberate, every strike precise. By the time the first rays of dawn pierced the canopy, the forest was eerily still. Andre stood at the edge of a ridge, his sniper rifle slung across his back. Below him, the valley stretched out, bathed in golden light. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The night's chaos felt distant now, almost surreal. But Andre knew better than to let his guard down. This was far from over. From one of the fallen men he had retrieved a radio. Adjusting the frequency, he listened for any chatter. After a moment of static, a familiar voice crackled through. "Unit 3, report. What's your status?" It was Kessler. Andre pressed the transmit button, his voice steady. "They're gone." There was a long pause, then a low chuckle. "Andre Cade, you've been busy." Andre didn't respond. He switched off the radio and tossed it into the underbrush. Kessler would know he was coming now, but Andre didn't care. He thrived on impossible odds, and this was just another mission. As he descended into the valley, his mind raced with questions. Why was Kessler after him? Who had given him the order? Andre didn't have the answers yet, but he would find them. Kessler had made the first move, but Andre would make the last.